hounds, chase ghosts, come sleep, watch out, demons are coming, run, sleep, hide, spirits, ghosts, hide, demons, hounds, ghosts, demons are coming.
Welcome home, my little hellhounds. Tonight we have 3 scary stories to sink our hellish teeth into. So sit back and enjoy. Don't forget to like the video, as this really helps push it into the YouTube algorithm. And please don't forget to subscribe and click that bell icon so you get notified every time I upload. To submit your stories, send them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now let's get right into it. Guys, be careful of online dating. Posted by MTP6921. As another Valentine's Day approached, I knew my 40-something-year-old overweight male self wasn't at the top of the list on most females. I had a profile on every Canadian dating site, and I don't know if it's my photo or my maxed out 14-hour Geek Squad job that makes women want to avoid me. However, my luck had changed when I got a hit on the Bumble dating site. She was 29 with 2 young kids. She was blonde hair, and based on her picture, I would say that she was at least an 8, which is not bad considering that I am about a 2. I was being cautiously optimistic because I know there are a lot of people who get catfished. Her name is Evelyn, and I've talked to her on the phone daily since the beginning of January. She lives 40 minutes away, and she actually invited me to her apartment. She told me that she couldn't find a babysitter, so I had no problem hanging out with her 1-year-old son and 3-year-old daughter. I went over to her apartment for the first time on a Saturday afternoon. I was just amazed that Evelyn was who she said she was. She had a slight Ukrainian accent, which I thought was cool because my grandparents were Hungarian. She told me that she moved to Dartmouth several years ago to escape the constant turmoil in the Ukraine. Her kids cried pretty often, especially the 3-year-old girl. Evelyn said that she's trying to teach them to speak her native tongue and English. I had a good time at her apartment despite the kids' constant crying. I really wanted to give a good impression, and so I made every effort to ignore her kids' behaviour. While I was at work the following Monday, I was delighted that Evelyn asked me if I wanted to stop by this night. I was absolutely amazed that she reached out to me again. I think I learned at this point to stay away from talking about boring topics like my job. I really didn't want to pry into Evelyn's life, but it seemed like there was little contact with the children's father, who may or may not have been giving her money. This visit went a little better, where the kids had passed out relatively early. I really don't know much about young kids, but Evelyn told me they were cranky from teething issues. I stayed at her apartment from 5 p.m. to about 10 p.m, where we mostly watched TV with the occasional small talk. I was just happy to feel like I was a part of something and someone actually wanted to be around me. As the days went on, I was almost spending every day at her apartment. I haven't made any physical advances on her yet, and figured that would just come with time. We talked about Valentine's Day and some potential ideas. Evelyn told me that she had family in New York and asked if I wanted to go with her. I figured, heck, why not? What else did I have to do that was that important? So I took the week off from work. We would take a plane to Toronto and then a train to New York. We both agreed that taking a train ride to New York would be a great way to sightsee and spend time together. We would eventually meet up with her sister and her husband and stay at their house for a few days. I was a little nervous about meeting her family, but I didn't want to pass up an opportunity that would possibly ruin our relationship if I declined her offer. I gave Evelyn my passport so she could enter the information and buy the tickets online. I was amazed that Evelyn paid for both my plane and train ticket. We got to the Halifax airport at 6 a.m. and boarded shortly afterwards. The flight was only about 2 hours long, but the kids yelling and screaming made it seem like a 20-hour flight. We got to Toronto and made our way towards the train station. On our way to the train, Evelyn was arguing on the phone with who I assumed was the father of her children. We eventually boarded the train, and even though Evelyn seemed like she was upset, we were both excited to head towards New York, especially because I had never been to the US. The kids had eventually got tired from crying. Natalia, the 3-year-old girl, was watching movies on a portable DVD player, and the boy, Sasha, was playing with his Matchbox cars. We had 4 seats that faced each other, where Sasha sat next to his mother and Natalia sat next to me. The train headed towards the Niagara Customs office. Evelyn would get constant phone calls, and with each call she got more and more upset. As we approached Niagara, Evelyn got to the point where she was practically yelling on the phone in Ukrainian, so much so that she had to get up and stand outside, in between the rail cars. Evelyn left the kids' paperwork with me as customs boarded the train. Evelyn remained outside, and I showed the border agents the kids' birth certificates and my passport. I explained to the agent that their mother was on the phone, and the agent didn't seem to mind. I put the kids' paperwork back in my pocket as we were cleared to continue to New York. We still had about a 9-hour train ride, and I was small talking with Sasha as his mother was still in between the train cars on the phone. The kids and I were tired from the early plane ride, and we eventually passed out. I woke up and Evelyn still wasn't back in her seat. As the kids remained asleep, I went to look for Evelyn. I exited the train car and saw that she wasn't on the platform in between the train cars. I figured maybe she just needed to cool off in a different area. I went back to the seat with the kids and Natalia was awake. I asked Natalia, "Have you seen your mummy?" Natalia responded, "No, I haven't seen mummy since school." I responded, "You saw your mummy before on the train?" Natalia said, "No, my mummy took me to play with my friends at school." I figured that Natalia was watching Dora the Explorer or something, and she was thinking about preschool. Sasha had woke up and I gave the kids snacks from the bag that Evelyn had brought. Evelyn still had not returned, and I was getting a glimpse into her behaviours. I tried calling her phone several times and it went to voicemail. I figured she had passed out somewhere on the train. I was also starting to get a glimpse into the stress and strain that Evelyn was dealing with, and just by me being here gave her an opportunity to escape for a bit. I tried my best to keep the kids entertained. Evelyn was easy because she would just watch movies where Sasha and I played Matchbox cars together. I liked playing cars with him because as long as he was playing, then he wasn't crying. I tried my best not to think about Evelyn, and I kept my mind focused that she had just passed out somewhere on the train. We eventually arrived at Penn Station. I told the kids to wait in their seats until their mother came back. All the passengers had left the train and the train conductor was encouraging us to exit the train. I told the conductor that I was waiting for the kids' mother, and the train conductor stated that everyone has left the train at this point. The conductor said that she was probably waiting for us outside the train in the station. So, as odd as this was, I held Sasha's hand with my suitcase in my other hand and exited the train while Sasha followed me. I looked around in all directions and I didn't see Evelyn anywhere. I stood in one spot for 15 minutes, thinking that maybe Evelyn had used the bathroom, but she didn't come. Then a male and a female approached us and the female said, "Sasha and Natalia, how are you loves doing?" I said, "Are you Evelyn's sister?" She said, "Yes, my name is Ruth. You must be David, right?" I said, "Yes, nice to meet you." Then she introduced me to her husband, Stan. I said, "I haven't seen Evelyn what seems like hours ago." Ruth replied, "Yeah, that's typical of Evelyn. But don't worry, let me just call her real quick." Ruth put the phone up to her ear and called Evelyn. Ruth said, "Evelyn, my darling, I'm here with David and your kids." "Oh, okay, I'll tell David to wait for you while I take the kids and then the both of you can walk to my house." Ruth hung up the phone and said, "I apologize for my sister. She ran off the train to pick me up something from the store. She said that she would be back in a few minutes and for you to wait for her while me and Stan take the kids back to our house." I replied, "Oh, okay, I'll wait here then." Ruth and Stan slowly walked away with the kids when I remembered that I gave Evelyn my credit card to hold. I had my suitcase that had nothing more than my clothes and passport. I patted my pockets and realised that I still had the kids' birth certificates. I had nothing else to do, so I glanced over the birth certificates. As I did that, I said, what the hell? Because at the bottom of the birth certificates, my name, David LaFleur, was listed as the kid's father. My head started spinning. I knew at that moment my naive self was being used as some type of mule. I couldn't let those kids leave. I knew something was up because Ruth didn't have an accent. I quickly ran towards the four of them as they got close to the Penn Station exit. I said, you want to know something, Ruth and Stan? I'll wait with the kids until Evelyn comes back. Ruth said, don't be silly, David. We just live a couple of blocks away. We'll keep the kids entertained. I then said, no, I'm sorry. The kids will wait with me. Then Ruth said, all you are is a boyfriend. You don't know these kids. I don't feel comfortable with you staying with these kids. I then said, if you take one more step with those kids, I'll yell for the NYPD to come over. Ruth said, go ahead. You see, David, all you are is a boyfriend, and I'll explain to the cops that my sister disappeared, and I don't feel comfortable having the kids with you. Then I pulled out the kids' birth certificates and said, you see, I'm actually their father. Do you see that? Then I pulled my passport out of my bag. I then said, you know what? I'm actually going to call the NYPD over, as I half-heartedly yelled for help. Stan and Ruth both walked away, but I knew those vultures wouldn't go far. I had two young kids who I assumed were worth $1 million in some diabolical scheme. I now have the two kids and no money. Evelyn had taken my phone charger and my phone is dead. I had to figure something out regarding the kids. I didn't want to hand them over to some creeps, and I didn't want to go to the police for fear that I would be accused of knowingly going along with this plot. I figured the weather is warm and it's Valentine's Day, so I'm sure I could bring in good money by panhandling for money with two young kids. I took the kids to Times Square, and within a couple of hours I made close to $300. I bought the kids food and I got a phone charger. We went to a Starbucks where I plugged my phone in. I looked at the Nova Scotian Missing Children website and didn't find anything, so I went to Facebook, where I found a grandmother who was concerned that she hadn't seen her drug-addicted daughter or her two young grandchildren in weeks. I looked on my phone and saw the cheapest way to get back to Halifax was by renting a car. I first needed to find a TD bank to get a debit card, which was required to rent a car in lieu of a credit card, which would took says to get. I found a bank about a mile away and I tracked the distance while carrying two young kids. I ditched my suitcase because I couldn't carry the weight within 2 hours. I got the debit card, then I walked over to Arvis to rent the car. My pathetic self only had $20 in my account, so I gave Avis $175 in cash to rent the car for 1 day. That included 2 car seats. I asked for the most fuel efficient car because I only had about $100 left over. I put the car seats in the car and then the kids. I synchronized my phone with the car's speakers and I put kids' songs on. I then got on 95 North for the 13-hour approximate car ride. I knew I had barely just enough money for gas, so I stopped at a supermarket in Connecticut and bought the cheapest food available for the 3 of us. As I approached the border to New Brunswick, I was nervous because of the forged birth certificates, and the kids were crying hysterically from being trapped in the car for too long. As I pulled into the border crossing, I handed the agent my paperwork, and the kids were still crying hysterically, so much so that the agent couldn't ask Natalia any questions. The agent sympathized with me for dealing with the crying kids and let me pass through. About 5 hours later, I made it back to my apartment, where I was beyond exhausted. I reached out to the grandmother on Facebook, and I gave her my address to pick up the kids. When the grandmother came to my apartment, I felt a sense of relief that this ordeal would be over for the kids. And it seemed like the grandmother just wanted the kids and didn't want to ask me 10,000 questions and get the police involved. So at first I thought this was just typical behaviour for the kid's mother, where the grandmother was protecting the daughter, but I knew something was off based on Natasha's reaction to the grandmother. Natasha just cried, and she didn't have any familiarity with this woman. Before the woman attempted to leave with the kids, I asked her to show me any proof in photos or anything else that these kids were her grandkids, which she didn't have. So I told her that she wasn't leaving with them without showing me some type of proof. She instantly argued with me that those were her grandkids and she was going to call the police, which I continued to tell her to call the police. But in reality, I still had 3 years of probation left for being in the same car as 5 pounds of marijuana. So thankfully, she didn't call out my bluff, and she just left the apartment. This Canadian sea-bearing town of Halifax is just one big child smuggling factory, I've concluded, which I had no idea was occurring. I thought for hours what to do, and finally I decided to take the kids to the emergency room, where I left shortly afterwards, where I concealed myself in winter type clothing. Instead of tinkering with old computers, I now investigate missing flyers to see what the motivation of the person who hung the flyers. I never found out if Sasha and Natalia were reunited with their real family. In hindsight, I doubt that was their actual names. As far as Evelyn is concerned, I constantly search online dating sites to see if she'll reappear to try to catfish someone else. I was born without parents. Posted by MTP6921. When I was 12 years old, my parents told me that I was adopted because they wanted me to be old enough to fully understand what being adopted meant. I have no other siblings, and both of my parents are in their 80s. My mother told me that no adoption agency would consider them because they were in their 50s when they attempted to adopt a child. She told me that they weren't particular about the age, race, or the gender of the child either. Seemingly out of nowhere, an adoption agency called Stellions Inc. had responded to my parents' application and wanted to set up a meeting. The company told my parents that they had a 3-month-old girl available. My parents jumped at the opportunity and met with the agency. The company was located in an old mansion in Manhattan that has since been torn down in order to build a high-rise. My parents told me that things were completely different before the internet took off, in that you really couldn't do much in the way of background checks or research into a company. The only real resources you could utilize were the Better Businesses Bureau, word of mouth, or you had to do your own research. My parents were just ecstatic that there was an actual baby available, and they really didn't care about researching the company. The issue that I'm running into now is that my birth certificate is fake. The adoption agency told my parents that I was born at St. Joseph's Hospital, and after doing countless hours of research and interviews, I determined that my birth certificate was not from that hospital, and in fact didn't originate from any hospital. The biggest piece of evidence that I had was when I met with the director of St. Joseph's neonatal department, who retired after working 40 years at the hospital, where she told me without a doubt that the birth certificate didn't originate from the hospital. There was really no way for my parents to know this, because finding uniformity in birth certificates up until recently just didn't exist. I even submitted my DNA to Ancestry, where there were 0 matches, and I wasn't linked to any family tree. The story from the Stallions Inc. adoption agency sounds really sketchy today, where they told my parents that the hospital's social worker gave them the baby from a young mother who didn't want to have children, where the director of neonatal services at St. Joseph's told me that they had their own adoption network that was affiliated with the Catholic Health Network. Everything has been really bizarre, and the only piece of evidence I have from the company is an old brochure that has a picture of 3 of the people who worked there. The picture didn't identify anyone by name, so I did extensive research on trying to find their identities. The one fascinating part of this ordeal was that if it wasn't for this photograph, then there would have been 0 evidence of the Stallions agency in the form of photographs. All the paperwork my parents had were just generic forms where the staff signature were illegible, to the point where I would wonder if that was probably done on purpose. I posted the photograph on every social media platform, and I waited for weeks, and the only responses that I received was from people who worked at other adoption agencies, who told me they had never heard of the company. My parents swore that they saw the Stallions ad in the Yellow Pages, so I looked online for a copy of the Yellow Pages. I did find a vintage Yellow Pages Manhattan copy, and sure enough, after spending $100 and waiting 2 weeks, I saw the name and phone number of the company, which really didn't help me too much. I had hit a dead end. I had so many unanswered questions that I thought would never be answered. I asked my parents about how I was as a baby, and I was surprised by their response. They told me that I basically lacked a temperament. My mother had bought every self-help book for new mothers, and I just didn't fit in anywhere in how a baby should behave. My parents didn't know if I had learning delays or if I had just been abused, but I just lacked certain innate characteristics. My mother told me that she couldn't rely on me to cry, to know that I needed something, because I just didn't cry. I didn't smile either. so my mother had to manually move my lips upwards in order to teach me how to smile. She told me that I was just a piece of clay that came with nothing else. I eventually learned everything that other babies were born with, but hearing my mother explain this to me definitely made me wonder more where I came from. Later on, I had no issues in school, and in fact I had my choice of what Ivy League school I wanted to attend. After more than a year, I got a message on Facebook from the photograph that I'd posted from the Stellions agency. The person told me that she was certain that one of the ladies that was photographed in the picture was her neighbour when she was growing up. She told me that she has passed away, but her husband was still living at the same house. She gave the address and told me that they were limited in understanding English, and they were from Austria. I didn't want to be intrusive and knock on the guy's door, so I sent him a simple letter basically stating my name and phone number, and I referenced his wife, Hildred Muller. I waited for weeks and I didn't get a response, so I reluctantly drove to Woodhaven, New York, in Queens, and knocked on his door. He answered the door, and I could tell he knew who I already was before I told him. He had an old world hospitality about himself and invited me into his house. His house was like a museum. Nothing had been updated since the 1940s. There was no TV and just one of those big radios that I think was being powered by vacuum tubes. He served me some tea from a silver-plated platter. I was just amazed being in the house and experiencing firsthand his long-forgotten traditions. He spoke with a thick Bavarian accent, but he could understand what I was saying. He was really trying to deflect all of my questions. He kept trying to allude to the point of letting sleeping dogs lie, and if I was doing well, then to not do anything that would jeopardize that. After being extremely insistent, he finally gave me some information. He told me about his wife and him were young children during the war, and the aftermaths of the war were worse than the actual war itself. He told me that he met his wife at a communist-run orphanage when they were 14. Him and his wife were gifted musicians, opened a lot of doors for them that nearly no other kids were privy to. Being a musician was a difficult occupation to make money, so they both took double majors in college in chemistry. His wife did a lot of research and evolutionary development of mammals, and was well published in most mainstream magazines. Eventually, she caught the eye of an emerging geneticist who was working on primates, where she worked with primates for over a decade, and then was disappointed because she felt that she learned everything that she could possibly learn about the genetic makeup of primates from the evolutionary standpoint. So she started her own laboratory, where she took her research to the next level. With working with humans, placentas were easy to get because oftentimes they would just be incinerated or thrown away in biohazard waste. Essentially, she learned the DNA makeup of a human inside and out, and like a car, how you could take something out to add an update that is better. Essentially, she learned the same thing about humans. All of this stuff was considered illegal, so you won't find any of this work in any kind of journals. Mr. Muller went on to talk about Dolly, the cloned sheep, which he considered a mere joke considering how advanced his wife's work was at the time. Mr. Muller told me eventually his wife's secrets got out and she had to destroy all of her research. He said, "If you see my house, there are no computers and nothing that could be linked to the work my wife did. So when the FBI came knocking on our door, they literally left with zero evidence." He went on to explain the stereotypes that him and his wife faced just by their accents and the region of Europe where they were born. He said that everyone still thinks that they would naturally do evil human experiments because of our association to the Axis during the war, but most people don't realize that I only have vague memories of my parents. I essentially indoctrinated into communism and not fascism. I was left completely stunned, sitting in this hand-carved wooden chair in this old man's house, who was well into his 80s. The teacup was perched up, and my elbow was at a 90-degree angle. My head was spinning, trying to follow everything he was saying with his Bavarian accent. When I knocked on his door, I was just expecting, "Yeah, she worked at the agency for a few years, then the agency went out of business, so she went too." I had no inkling that I was going to be told this information, and the main question remained, why was he telling me this? So I said, "Mr. Muller, you told me more information than I was expecting. Why?" He responded, "My wife was a great person. We have no children, and I will die at any time. If you didn't knock on my door, then I would have taken this to my grave." I responded, "But why did you tell me all of this information?" He said, "As I told you when you knocked on the door, if you are doing well, then let sleeping dogs lie." I responded, "Were you insinuating something about me when you told your wife's story?" He told me to carefully remove the wood panel from the back of the radio, then move it towards me. So I did what he said and exposed the back of the radio towards him. Then he told me to remove a section of the old glass vacuum tubes, which I did. Then he told me to slide the empty metal casing towards me, which exposed a small wooden box. He told me to open the wooden box. I opened the box and there were pictures of a newborn infant on top. He said that baby was supposed to be our baby, but the baby would have been labelled a monster. So he started a fake adoption agency where only one child was adopted. Then he said, "Keep looking through the photographs." I started to cry as I flipped through the photographs because they were of me from a baby until about the age of 14, which was when his wife died. He started crying along with and said that he was sorry. He said, "If you tell anybody about this, then you'll be looked at as a Frankenstein." I really was at a loss for words. I thought maybe my parents were a high school fling or something, but as I pieced everything together, I figured I was just a combination of a bunch of different DNA strands from different placentas, which would explain my lack of being born with distinct family traits. I got up to leave his house and I hugged him. He told me to hold on to this information that he told me until I got older, where I could better decide if it was in my best interest or my kid's best interest to let it be known. I am now in a postdoctorate program studying genetic engineering, where modern scientists are grappling with solutions that my lab mother had figured out decades ago. Don't pass out in a casino bathroom. Posted by MTP6921. I had turned 21 on June 21st, 2016, and my grandmother took me to Atlantic City, where she went on her honeymoon before the casinos were established. Unfortunately, my grandfather had passed away in 1999. At least, my grandmother has me to go to places with her. We stayed at the Trump Taj Mahal, and I just loved the bright lights and the sounds of the slot machines. My grandmother and I decided to play the penny slots. With just 1 penny at a time, we were definitely not their target customers. My grandmother carried around a big purse where she had lots of snacks stuffed inside. Between the free drinks and my grandmother's snacks, there was really no reason to get up besides go to the bathroom. Every time I would get up, my grandmother would save my seat at the slot machine. My grandmother was raised during the Depression, and she developed some unique habits. Like if someone had only eaten half of their hot dog and left it on the side of the garbage, then she would just finish eating it. I thought it was funny, and she probably had developed an immunity to every imaginable germ. Watching my grandmother, I followed suit and did the same thing by finishing other people's meals. I was 21 and had no real responsibilities. I came from a dysfunctional home where my parents were, at times, functioning alcoholics, and other times they weren't really functional at all. Unfortunately, I had the same addictive personality like my parents, as does my grandmother, and the slot machines were like candy to our brains. Neither my grandmother nor I had cell phones, so we had no one to bother us. We just had such a good time playing the slots and joking around with each other. There was no real concept of time inside the Taj Mahal. 2 a.m. looked the same inside the casino as 2 p.m. We just played and played and played. We both seemed to drift off at times and close our eyes for a short time. Then we wake up and continue to play. I would lose a penny, then win 3 pennies, then lose 5 pennies, then win 7 pennies. The thrill of winning mixed with the bright lights and catchy sounds sent a jolt of happiness through my brain. My grandmother and I were definitely poster childs for the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We just both had addictive personalities. I remember reading about radio contests to see who can stay up the longest, where days of sleep deprivation led to permanent mental health issues for the contestants. I knew things were getting bad when multiple cocktail waitresses would say, "Hey, you're back again," or "You were in the same spot as last week." I was hanging on by a thread. I knew if I got away from the stimulus of the machines, then my mind and body would just collapse. I had complete tunnel vision. Everything besides my grandmother was completely filtered out. The casino manager actually approached my grandmother and I to give us a friendly warning that it was time to leave. I almost collapsed when he told us that it had been 3 weeks straight that we were playing the same slot machines. I think we caused red flags in their computers because neither of the slot machines we were using were generating any money for the hotel. I think we were scared to move for fear that we would both collapse. The casino made an exception and brought us both coffees. After drinking the coffees, my grandmother and I agreed to get up and go to the bathroom, then leave. When I got into the bathroom, I knew that I had pushed my mind and body way too far. From days, if not weeks, of sleep deprivation, I was still concerned for my grandmother, but I truly had nothing left in me. So I went in one of the bathroom stalls, locked the door and sat down on the toilet, where I instantaneously passed out. I had such deep dreams that I never had before. I was in my own dream world. Nothing could wake me up but time. Then, like a bare nose hibernation is over, I felt a sensation in my head that it was time to get up. I opened my eyes and there's nothing but absolute darkness. A darkness that I haven't experienced since I was in deep in an underground cave when I was on a 10th grade field trip. I thought that I had gone blind because there was nothing but darkness. My head was just so exhausted. I feel like I could close my eyes and sleep more, but my adrenaline was starting to kick in. I'm still feeling a bit woozy, and I say, where am I? I was still trying to remember all the weird dreams I had on top of trying to figure out where I am in this complete darkness. I'm in a sitting position, so I try to stand up, but my legs are numb, so I sit back down. I then try to recall where I am, and I say, am I sitting in a toilet in the casino? I think to myself, this can't be. Did the lights in the bathroom break? Why hasn't anyone else come in? I yell out, hello, hello. The lights in the bathroom are out. Grandma, can you hear me? I'm met with deafening silence. I reach my arms out and feel metal walls on both sides of me, so I know for sure that I'm in a bathroom stall. I figure I sat for too long and I must have put too much pressure on my nerves, so that's why my legs are numb. I decided to throw myself on the floor. I leaned forward and I could feel the door of the stall in front of me. I used the door to brace myself to the floor. I continually say, ooh, ah, ooh, until I hurl myself on the floor. My legs are still too weak to move, so I drag myself with my arms and reach up to unlock the door to the stall. I get out of the stall and I get a sensation of extreme hunger and thirst. I now focus on finding the sinks. I use my arms to drag my body on the bathroom floor. I can't remember where the sinks were located, so I just continually move around on the floor. The fear of the absolute darkness outweighs the disgustingness of the bathroom floor. Eventually I start to feel metal pipes, and I realise that I'm under a sink. I'm starting to get a little sensation back in my legs, so with one hand I reach up for the sink and reach out with my other hand and thrust myself upwards until I'm on my knees. I yell out a loud groaning sound and I awkwardly stand up. My legs are shaky and weak, but at least I can feel them. I give myself a minute to allow my legs to get reacclimated and allow circulation to go through them. I reach out and feel metal, and I push in and realise that it's one of those faucets that you push in to get water in order to get water to come out. I use one hand as a cup and I lean forward and continually drink from my hand until I am satisfied. I start to feel that my legs have some strength, so I take small steps where I hold on to the sink. I get an overwhelming urgency to urinate, so I decided to pee in the sink rather than trying to find the urinal. I unzip my pants and all I can think of If someone opens the door, then I would be so embarrassed or possibly arrested. I finish peeing and I pick a direction and I slowly move my legs. I feel around the walls and eventually I feel the frame of a door and I push on it forward. As the door opens, I see nothing and I hear nothing. I'm scared beyond belief. I don't know if there was a massive power outage or some type of evacuation happened or there was some type of apocalypse. I yell out, "Hello, is there anyone else here? Hello." I get no response, so I continually yell out, "Hello." I vaguely remember the women's bathroom being next to the men's bathroom, so I guide myself against the wall until I feel a door. I figure that it must be the women's bathroom, so I open the door. I yell out, "Grandma, are you in there? Grandma, are you there?" I wait a few moments and in a low raspy voice I hear, "John, is that you? Turn the lights on. Where am I?" I say, "Grandma, I think we're still in the casino. I don't know what's going on. There's no power anywhere. It's just not the bathroom. The casino is completely dark as well." My grandmother responded, "Casinos never close, especially the Taj Mahal." I responded, "I know, Grandma. I have no idea what's going on." My grandma responds, "How long have we been asleep?" I responded, "I have no idea. I'm guessing days." My grandma says, "I can't move my legs." I responded, "I know, I couldn't move mine either. Give them a few minutes and you'll get the sensation back. Try to move around as you sit down. I'm going to go and try to find out what's going on." My grandmother responds, "Okay, but come back. Don't leave me to die." I say, "I won't. I'll come back for you." I exit the bathroom and yell out, "I'll be back, Grandma." And she responds, "You better." I try my best to remember as much as I could about the casino and the arrangements of everything. It's difficult because it's as dark as an underground cave. There is zero light, or at least I hope that's the problem, and I haven't gone blind. But then I think that my grandmother couldn't see either. I thought there's emergency lights that should come on if there's a power outage, so I really have no idea of what's going on. I get a dreamlike memory of dropping money on the floor and remembering a red light carpet. Then I remember the garbage cans alongside the walkway where people would leave all their uneaten food. I slowly start to remember that there's a walkway made up of tiles in the middle of the casino floor that separates two areas of slot machines. So if I make it to the middle area, then I probably could walk towards the exit. I feel the floor and its carpet. I slowly walk and I feel slot machine after slot machine. I walk slow so I don't bang my legs into chairs. I am in a virtual maze and I feel like I'm just going around in circles. The feeling of overwhelming hunger is starting to consume me as well. My legs have most of their strength back at this point, but I'm consumed with hunger and fear. Navigating around the casino floor is confusing enough with the lights being on, and in complete darkness, it's virtually impossible. I must have been wandering around aimlessly for an hour in a virtual circle. I have to come up with a plan. I know my grandmother must be terrified as well. I have no rope or anything else. Not to say that rope would help me. Then I have an aha moment. I say out loud, "The chairs. Use the chairs," meaning the back of the chairs move to the side when someone gets up from the slot machine. So if I move the back of the chairs to their sides, then that's how I'll know I've been down that row. I can't explain why all the chairs were facing forward. If there was a mass exodus, then most of the chairs would be facing to their sides. As I walk each chair I pass, I move it to its side. This takes a painstakingly long amount of time, but my wandering method didn't work. Eventually my method seemed to work, as I can tell which rows I've been down already. Remarkably, I feel a divide in the carpet from the tile, and I say, thank God. I have grainy memories of coming into the casino and seeing a staircase and escalators that were opulent, but my grandmother wanted nothing to do with them. But I do remember getting on an elevator, and I believe we went to the 3rd floor, so I know that I have to find the stairs now. I know we originally came in through the boardwalk, and we didn't walk that far once we got inside the casino, so I have to find the stairs and not miss them, because the hotel is long, and if I walk in the opposite direction, the boardwalk, I am virtually dead, because I'll never find my way back in the pitch black, because the hotel casino is so big and long. So I slowly walk with my hands out. I walk back and forth, and I can tell that the tiled area is about 6 foot wide. Eventually I find an area where the tile opens up. My hands reach out to the walls, and I feel metal elevator doors. Of course their buttons don't light up. Next to the elevators is the wall that feels like a dead end. So I feel the elevators again and move past them. I know there must be stairs in the middle of the casino floor. I want to find the stairs and don't want to keep walking down that tile corridor, as I didn't want to fall down the stairs. So once I make it past the elevators, I slowly put my foot down to the right and feel more tile. So I'm guessing this is more corridor. I backtrack a little bit, and I try to move in a horizontal direction to the elevators, towards the middle of the casino floor. I inch my way towards the center with my hands out, and eventually my right leg hits something, and I'll quickly determine that it is an escalator. Though I'm consumed with hunger, I know I'm close to getting out of here. I walk down the escalators. Then I get off and walk down 2 more sets of escalators. I figure that I'm on the ground floor, and I'm overwhelmed with disappointment that it's still complete darkness. I have no answer for this. I figure the glass entry doors should emit some form of light, even if it's the moonlight, if it's dark outside. I know that I have to walk towards the boardwalk, and if I move in the wrong direction, then I'm better off dead. I remember how I walked down the escalator, where I went down one way. Then the next floor, I was turned around. So, I figure that I need to walk straight. I force myself to count steps, and if I walk more than 100, then I know I'm going the wrong way. So I slowly move forward with my arms out. I counted 60 steps, and for the first time I can see something other than darkness. I can barely make out a silhouette of a wall. As I move towards the wall, I can't explain why. There's only a small amount of light getting through. I reach out with my hands and I feel glass. I'm still baffled on why there's only faint light. Then, as I move along the glass, I can eventually see a slither of the boardwalk, and it's daytime, and people are just casually walking. Then I see that there is wood panels on the outside, and the doors are boarded shut. So I frantically start banging on the glass doors, and I can see people look in my direction, but they just continue to walk by. I don't know if there was a hurricane or something to explain why the doors are boarded shut. So with little energy I have left to knock and knock and knock. I don't know if people think the knocking is from construction or if they just don't care. Eventually I fall to the floor, put my back on the wall and bang with my elbows against the glass. The hope that I once had is gone. My body has zero energy and I'm going to die like a trapped rat. I just can't keep my eyes open anymore. I have no idea when the last time I ate was, because I don't know how long I was asleep for. Then I pass out. I slowly wake up and realise that I'm on a hospital gurney. Apparently someone heard me knocking and notified the police. The Good Samaritan was a former casino worker who knew the casino was essentially abandoned and there was no work going on. I was given IVs that gave me enough strength for me to regain my consciousness. I asked the nurse, "Where's my grandmother?" She responds, "Do you want me to call your grandmother and tell her you're in hospital?" I say in a weak, raspy voice, "No, my grandmother was in the casino with me." The nurse said, "Sir, the police report says you're probably homeless and somehow you wandered into the casino." I say, "No, my grandmother and I were playing the slot machines for days with no rest, and we both went into the bathrooms and each passed out in a stall." The nurse says, "Sir, the Taj Mahal went bankrupt months ago. If your story is accurate, then you have been asleep for months." I start to get weak again and tell the nurse, "Please, my grandmother is on the 3rd floor, on the women's bathroom." Then I pass out again. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thanks for listening. If you have any scary stories, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.